I'm also proud to mention that I'm currently pursuing my MBA at Syracuse Whitman School of Business with a dual emphasis on marketing and entrepreneurship, and I am set to graduate in 2023. Throughout my career, I have served in leadership roles at companies like Wilton Brands, NBC Universal, and Faber-Castell, where I helped to transform product portfolios and grow brands into industry leaders. As the first creative director for Black Girls Run, I helped to establish the brand's presence and grew it into the largest Black women's running brand in the United States with my work in digital marketing. Today, I continue to power business and brand development for my clients. I'm currently serving as a head of business and brand development for Hollingsworth Soul, a Harlem-based luxury brand. I'm just really passionate about design and creative problem solving, and I look forward to continuing to make a positive impact in a broad
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, you know it's the CEO series. That intro kind of walked through 30 years. She lives 30 years, which I was always kind of shocked when I read that. But today, our guest is Delanie West, founder and creative director of Be Super Creative, to give you some background, I remember when she was born. So that takes care of that portion of it. So with that, let's welcome Del. Del, hey, how are you?
I'm good. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I was reading your bio earlier in the week and the day as well. And then when you went in that video, you talked through that and some of the things you kind of glossed over. But just to give a little background to that, you were vice president, general manager of product development at Wilton Brands. You were vice president, NBC Universal, Comcast Company. You served as COO for Healthy Roots Doll Company. You were the co-founder of Newark Historical Renaissance Ride, and it just goes on and on, as well as roles at Faber-Castell. It's absolutely amazing. So I always like to start with, walk me through from getting the paper off the stage to where you are today. I don't want to say 30 years, but multiple years. Give us kind of the highlight, because we don't have 30 years worth of time in here to talk to.
Well, I always like to say, I thank my mom for plugging me into technology, because I really got my first job out of undergrad at Hampton by her faxing me through my computer the New York Times job ad, right?
Yeah.
So I responded to my first official job through a scanned, New York Times job ad. I'm dating myself, but this is before you could go on the internet and find a job, no LinkedIn. That was a job that I spent about 15 years at, and I learned a lot, right? I got my undergrad degree in design. I'm an introvert, right? Can you believe that? And I just wanted to be creative. Like, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to draw. But that first experience blossomed me in that when I came in as a junior designer. And when I left, I was vice president and general manager of a few different divisions, right? And so I was fortunate to work for some owners who let me grow. They basically said, well, what do you want to know? What do you want to do? And they let me, it was really a startup, even though you didn't call it a startup. I was the fourth designer at that firm. And when I left, there were upwards of 50 designers in different places in the company. But I was always given a task or a problem to solve. And even if it wasn't something that I knew how to do, I figured it out. That learning and always growing and always stretching is what always positioned me for what was next. And then after that, I survived a few private equity transactions with this firm. The owners were able to sell and make a nice profit. Didn't survive the last one. And then I went on to work in electronics. I had a strong non-compete, so I had to do something else, right? During that period of time, I couldn't stay in my industry. And I worked at a pretty cool company that makes, this company is cool because I always say, when I go to a hotel anywhere in the world, I can turn over the clock radio, and 90% of the time they've made that product. So I worked for that company for a short time, and I got the call that would kind of change, my next, meaning, moving me from the East Coast to the Midwest, and that was to work for Faber-Castell, which is a German company.
Yeah.
They are actually the oldest, out of all the registered trademarks in the United States, they are number 5, and they're the only one that's still standing. So they're a pretty old company. And you can imagine, I'm an artist, got a degree in design. So when I got this call for this opportunity, I was like, what? Yes, of course I want to help you make product. So that brought me to Cleveland, and I spent 5 years doing that. And then after that, there was relocation, moving things back to Germany. But I had always had my own business, right? I always had my side gig. And I learned early in my career that my secret sauce wasn't my name or my resume. It wasn't that. It was what I did. It was, and I couldn't articulate it early in my career, but now I know what it is. It was my ability to create value.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that I needed to market that separate from Delanie West, the employee. Well, what is that creating value thing that you do? And that I named, I call that being super creative, right?
That's the brand, yeah.
That's the brand. That's what I do. That's what it, and it's kind of it is a call to action to everybody. Be super creative, right? Bring it. It's basically bring your creativity. Just do it, right? The first name was a little presumptuous. It was the super creative, right? The super creative. And I was like, that's terrible, Delanie. That's not encouraging.
Yeah.
Change it. But having that business on the side was great because I always had something that I could go to. It's like a plan B, right?
Yeah.
And that is what I've been focused on for the last 5 years, consulting for multinational brands, solopreneurs, in addition to launching some other ventures that are my own. So I know I left a lot out.
You branded, you kind of glossed through 30 years, but I mean, it was all high points, in doing that. So that's cool. I remember you and I having a conversation, or maybe I read a quote. I was trying to think where it came from. And we both you did work for Martha Stewart during the time that I was there. Mm-hmm. And I remember something that I don't know whether you were giving a speech or whatever it was. You said that you were sitting in a meeting, excuse me, and you thought about, I'm designing for other people and I can design for myself. Something along those lines. And I thought about that when I think about people in their careers. If you were doing this work, could you do it on the other side? Because this is the side gig thing. Can you go a little deeper into where that inspiration came from when you thought about it? Do you remember saying that?
Exactly. I think it was a Fast Company article, but I say this often.
Yes.
Because it really is my light bulb moment. I was a part of a company, and the transaction was involved. The deal basically went like this: to make this deal happen, you need to create this brand. And this brand was the Martha Stewart brand, right? So our team, essentially, we're just doing what we always did in terms of creating consumer products, but we needed to create products that were under this brand. And so At that time, I was running an innovation incubator within the company, and all we did was come up with ideas, right? We didn't come up with ideas for a specific brand. We just ideated. And when I realized that all of these particular ideas were just basically placed under this brand, and then of course she does her magic, right? She goes out, she sells it, she just.
The Martha thing.
For me, the veil was lifted because she's a Jersey girl, right? So I always followed her, and she made it entertaining, just really glamorous. And I just said, so this is how it works. It's like I got to see behind the curtain. I said,
Yeah.
So that was my light bulb moment in that.
Okay.
If you can pull the other pieces together, Delanie, you can do this for yourself.
I remember that reading that article. I'm like, wow, sitting in that meeting and realizing that, because lots of times when people are doing work for companies are hiring people to do what you're doing, and you just got to figure out. And then that comes back to this branding piece. You posted something online today. We were talking about this before you came on. Can you walk us through that? Because I said I love that graphic.
Right. It is called kind of tongue-in-cheek, brand yourself. I like to use AAVE, right? Because it gets the point across. And I always do translation, but it's
I got it.
Brand yourself. And I was thinking about how much time we invest in having a social media conversation, right? And the thing now is getting yourself verified, right? There's a price to getting yourself verified. And I see people do this, but that's not where it stops. Like, you've got to do the other stuff, which is what is your platform? What are you known for? What kind of content are you creating to have a conversation with your audience, to explain, represent yourself? Who are you? Why do I want to work with you? Why do I want to hire you? It is a strategy. And I always see, got a lot of friends on social media, and I say, well, I'm working. I'm on social because I'm working. I'm not sure you're working. I'm not sure what you're doing, but you're spending a lot of time doing this thing, and you don't have a strategy. So some people are there for social. Some people are there to position themselves. That's why I show up. And the secret for me is I have channels that are for business and branding of me and my brand. I have channels that are for Delanie, the brand. And then I have channels for my friends and family where I can just let my hair down and be myself. 3 different personas.
Yes. You can't do all in one. And here's what bothers me when I'm talking to people. They'll reach out and say, Ron, can you help? I just got laid off, and this and the other. I said, you know what? I'll see what I can. I said, send me the latest version. Send me your CV. And when this comes back, it just hurts me so much. So I have to. Can you give me a week? I have to update it. I said, here's what bothers me. I see you on Facebook every day posting stuff. You don't post things on LinkedIn, and you're just doing the social thing. And now you need a week. So if I was a recruiter and called you and said, can you send me your CV? I want to have a discussion. And you told them that, you can forget it. It's over with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So managing that brand across multiple channels, you can still have it, but you have to think in terms of this reaches this group, this reaches that group. It's kind of, and I'm not a marketing person, but I kind of figured that out on my own.
Yeah. Game changer for me, everybody's doing it now, but maybe 10, 12 years ago, I always had my own website, and I always controlled my story. I always positioned who I was and who I need to be. And I had an interview for this global position, and I had to meet with the head of the company who was a count. He's a count, and his wife was a countess. And so I had to go to Germany to have this meeting, right? This interview. And I'm looking at etiquette. Where do you go for the protocols on how to address a count? It wasn't Googleable. So I'm preparing for this meeting. We're meeting in this really quaint German town. They've got twins, and so we're having dinner with the family, and I see the Countess open a folder, and she has printed out everything that I made available on my website.
Whoa.
The global CEO was in his 70s. The Countess was a younger American executive who we had a connection. She's a New Yorker. She's a runner, so but
Yeah.
she did the hiring. I'll just say she did the hiring because she did the research and she had everything that there was to know about me that she could find on the internet in that folder.
Wow. Wow.
And at that dinner, I learned that they didn't even have their home wasn't wired for internet because that's just how rustic that they were living in a little rustic town. They didn't have internet in the town. So that to me was the moment that I said, it's really important to have control over your narrative so someone in a little small village in Germany can look you up.
Yeah, you own the story. Someone reached out to me this past week, and they said, I came across your profile. We have an interesting project that I think you'd be interested in. And we went back and forth. And there's a project that comes up as a result of that. The brand presence social on the, I don't want to say under the disguise of, you mentioned multiple ways of approaching that, which is what I like. So there's a social side with my friends. There's a personal side, and then there's my business side. So it's kind of the managing that and keeping a balance across those.
Yeah. Social media managers refer to that as your content pillars. And, you have to decide, well, it's kind of like, well, when you put your skills on your resume, you have that a section and you list the things that you're adept at. What are those things? So your content pillars, what do you want people to know you for? It's me, it's my creativity, my sense of humor, my philanthropic side, the things that I like to do athletically. And you will see those certain things that really represent who I am to the core, right? That's truly me. But you'll see them presented in a way that's professional, that clearly articulates how connected I am to them. And it's me being myself, right? But those content pillars aren't present on the channels where I'm just letting my hair down and I'm just talking about, family pictures. And so in this age of being on all the time, right? We got television production studios in our pockets. So we can control a lot.
Yeah. We can control a lot. And I think that's the message that people have to, I'm going to say realize this. And I'm only speaking in terms of the career aspect of it. You've got to realize that you, whether you know it or not, you are a brand. People see you coming, they think certain things about you. And you have to guide that narrative or someone else will guide it, as a result of that. But the question I wanted to ask you, that when you look through your CV, your bio, you have so many projects you're working on. And you mentioned the innovation lab that you ran. How do you stay inspired? I know you run. I walk, and walk is inspiration for me. How does Dell stay inspired to always come up with different ideas? Because you go into these, big shot, I call them the big shot rooms. They're looking for insight, and you're the expert.
Oh God, well, you mentioned walking. I'm actually doing more walking now because my joints are like saying, "Help me!" So
welcome to the club. I have 2 knees that have been done with ligaments. Yeah.
So I'm doing a lot more walking, but that walking stimulates creativity. You know this. It is equal doses of being in nature. Like I need that. Like I'll get on the treadmill, in my house, but I need to be doing that outside in nature, right?
Yeah.
That stimulation. I'm a huge people watcher, so ethnographic research to watch what people do. What do they do when they sit down to have, lunch? Well, how do they walk into a store and shop? I'm always watching people for clues. And then the other part is having equal part to rest, because all of those inputs, all those things that you fed into your brain, the reading, the watching this, those connecting of the dots happen when your brain is at rest. That's when those ideas really start to develop.
Mm.
Um, I went back to school, right? And that for me gets me in different rooms, different conversations, reading different things. I've got access to this amazing research
Yeah.
um, lab that they have at Syracuse. And so um, I have this conversation with myself all the time, Delanie. You can't say yes to everything
Yeah.
because I realize I am doing a lot,
Yeah.
but it's what gives me energy. And that's where when I can sit down and think about an idea, it's because I have all those inputs. It is because I'm involved and engaged with different people from all over the world. Um, and those are my inputs.
Yeah. I'm a Nat Geo, National Geographic. I love that channel,
Mhm.
and I love whenever they do the piece on snakes, and snakes are basically blind, but all of their interpretation of what's happening outside is through their tongue.
Mm.
So if you think of that, and you talked about you watch people and all those things, you're always on. I'm the same way. I look at the way that people respond to things. I watch everything, and I take it and internalize it to try and come up with. If I were trying to connect with a person, if I'm in a meeting, I'm looking for signals. You talked about talking with the count, so right away that takes it to a different level. How am I interpreting that? She did X, he did Y. How do they make a decision on 24/7 or waking hours as it relates to that? And so I'm glad to hear you say that, because I said I'm not crazy, because I do the same.
Mm-mm. No, I just took a semester break, and the only class that I took was a residency down in New Orleans, and it was on negotiation, and it was
Mm.
taught by the chancellor of Syracuse University. And I am going to kill his name, so I'm not going to pronounce it. But I didn't realize that the chancellor was given this course, because I'm going through the syllabus, and I said, "Oh my God, the chancellor's doing this session. Let me read all the materials. Really, really good." But he's a masterful negotiator, and I learned so much about being at a table and reading the signals, right? Um, Making your statement and waiting.
Mhm.
And all of those cues that happen in terms of physical interaction are a part of what understanding and interpreting human behavior, so you can influence decision, so you can maybe get the approval on the project, right? So that session for me, I think, affirmed a lot of things that I learned in business over the years. And I just kind of sat back and said, "Oh, so that's why we did it that way."
Yeah, yeah.
The poker face, like there's a whole strategy around that.
Oh wow. It seems like I'm talking to my mental state now. In doing that. The poker faces. My father would always tell me, and as I said, I grew up in a small town. We were talking earlier, 3 traffic lights, and my father was a small business person. He said, when you get in the room, you listen, you read the room, and you listen to see. He said the people who lots of times that are talking, there's no value there, but it's the person who's sitting over and very quiet and taking in everything. That may be the power person in the room, and this other person you can kind of maybe
Yep.
a minus 5 points or whatever it is. I never forgot that.
Yep.
And I still use that same kind of a narrative when I'm talking to people or I'm in a room. I'm consistently scanning the room, and it's kind of like the snake sticking the tongue out and taking in what I'm doing.
Yeah. I always say, um, you know, when I have a meeting, or a really important meeting, or I want to dig into an opportunity, I want to take that meeting in person.
Mm.
I want to read behavior. I want to read body language. Um, Phone calls are great. Zooms are great, but you just miss out on so many nonverbal cues.
Yeah, yeah,
And and if you're not paying attention, you miss it all.
yeah. I had a big strategy meeting the other week, and we were trying to close this big deal. But one of my partners logged in, and he didn't put his camera on. And the two of us were sitting there with the cameras on, and I'm thinking, dude. And then he explained as to why, but there's no need to explain the why. This is a big deal, and you should be on camera to make eye contact and all those kinds of things. And I think lots of times people don't realize that. I understand lots of times people, if there's a call that's early in the morning, I understand, it may not be there and whatnot. But in initial meetings and setting the tone of it, I need to kind of set my brand as to who I am and all of these kinds of things.
Right. Even, I learned part of the strategy is scoping out the room. Where are you going to be sitting? Where's that power position in the room?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm taking a meeting, in front of a big expansive window, maybe I want to be in front of the window, right? Maybe I want the higher chair. So all of
Yeah,
that strategy goes into setting up your meeting.
I just say you're preaching to the choir. You're preaching to the choir. And see, the thing is, when you think about the things that you're talking about, I'm like, wow, you learned that too. I learned that from a kid coming up and working in jobs. My first little job was working in a barbershop, and I've worked in a barbershop until I graduated from high school, and just listening and reading and watching things and all of this, and now all of it comes into play. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the learning journey, because you decided to go back to school, Syracuse, at that. It's not like any school you went to get that MBA. And you're talking about how you stay in touch with what's happening in your industry. In other words, for you, and I was reading your bio. I said, come on, Dale, 30 years. I mean, come on. But yeah, okay, cool, okay.
Yeah.
But how do you when you think in terms of this learning? And I always say life is a learning journey. You should never ever stop learning, stop
Mhm.
reading,
Mhm.
stop trying to get more information on any topic that you're interested in, because when you do, you're in a downward spiral.
Right. Right. I think you're either that person or not. It's what feeds you,
Okay.
what makes you want to get up and do whatever it is that you want to do, right?
Mhm.
For me, it is I'm interested in everything, right? Um, my MBA was something that I would have loved to have done 20 years ago, but you know what? I was traveling, helping to grow somebody else's business. There was not being able to do it online, so there was no campus that was going to accommodate my
Yeah.
schedule.
Yeah.
But COVID gave me the time. Like, you got the time, Dylan. You've been in, you're in the house. Just do it. Um, it is God, and I lost my train of thought. We were talking about oh, you know, all the things that keep you engaged.
Yeah.
But for me, um, I'm just interested in so many things, and I get to a point where I feel like I've mastered it. Um, I've gotten what I needed to get out of that experience, and always those things help me in other areas of my personal life
Yeah.
or my business efforts. But it's just constantly being curious and
Hmm.
wanting to learn.
Mm.
If I had the capacity to do more, I would,
Yeah.
because it's what feeds me.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Cool. So, during my time at Martha Stewart, we adopted the High School of Art and Design in New York. And I got Sharon, who was our CEO, to do the commencement address. We brought interns in. These were creative kids. But what I got from those kids was lots of times their parents were saying, become a teacher, become an accountant, become this, do this, because you'll always have this creative stuff. There's nothing there. And when Sharon, I'm sorry, I forget her name now. She was our chief creative director. But she gave Gail Towery gave the commencement address that first year that we owned that school, and she talked about she was dyslexic coming up. She wanted to be a creative, and her parents tried to guide her in a different direction. She stuck to her guns, and she did what she did, and she was chief creative officer for Martha Stewart. She'd risen to the top of the food chain, but the brand was really, really hot. What advice would you give to kids that are struggling? They really want to do creative things. They want to sketch. They want to do all these kinds of things, and their parents say, "Nope, you become a." Not that I'm disparaging school teachers, or you become a salesperson, or whatever it is. What advice would you give them?
Well, that's really difficult because your parents are paying that tuition, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I think if you're in that position where maybe this is an impossible position to change their opinion because they're financing your education, you can have those conversations with your administrators at school and
Yeah.
do something that is a dual degree. Like you can have those conversations. Like I think
Okay.
I've heard like Ruth Carter, she just won her second Oscar. She's Hampton
Yeah.
graduate. She actually worked with the administration to create the degree that she wanted. And so you can do what your parents want you to do, right? But you can also um, negotiate a path for your learning so you can get the skills to do the creative thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And take a summer internship job doing the thing that you want to do,
Yeah.
right? Talk to your parents about the finance part of it. Well, dad, mom, if I do this, here's the type of careers that I can go into, and this is the type of money that they make. Today is a lot easier.
Yeah.
When
It
I
is.
did
Yeah.
there wasn't, Steve Jobs was just starting to do his thing. There was not the internet. There was not all these creative.
Well, you're gonna date yourself, but it's cool.
Well, it's okay. Listen, the 30 years has dated me, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
it is. I think if you're able to talk to your parents, from a financial perspective about the career path, that might give you some good ammunition for maybe winning that battle.
Yeah. That's so cool. Um, as a result of Gail Towey's commencement address, one of the mothers came over to me in tears and said, my son has been telling me he wants to do creative. I'm telling him to become a school teacher, whatever it is. And I'm not saying that disparage those people that decide to do that because it's what you want to do for your life. And she said, I realized tonight I've got to let him go with this and I've got to support him. And I've got 100% support. Thank you so much for this evening because if this wouldn't have been there, my goal would have been for him to go and do this. And I told her, I said, I know so many lawyers, I know so many accountants, people, engineers that have started one thing that are doing something totally different.
Right.
And I said, everybody's got to kind of find
Right.
themselves. But I never forgot that conversation. She was in tears talking to me through this after our chief creative officer, Gail Towey, told that story. And yeah.
It's even though there's so much more opportunity, creative work still doesn't always get the credit of what we actually do, which is creating that thing that we can sell.
Yeah.
We're in business to sell something. So whatever that something is, you're gonna have to work with a creative person to articulate that value or to make that thing. We don't get the credit, and sometimes we don't take the credit, to validate that you need me, you need a creative person on your team. And so in my career, I've done the creative, and now I'm going back to plug in the business because I've been working on both sides,
Yeah.
and I see that the handshake between the two is necessary.
Yeah.
So but absolutely, you can't, the world doesn't move without creativity.
Exactly. And basically, what you're doing from the business side, the creative side, you've nailed it. The side from the MBA, from the school that you're going to, it gives you the complete package to go into companies and and I think lots of times, and I counter it so much with human resources people, they're so involved in the human resources, you need to understand the business and the challenges the business is having. So it's kind of a well-rounded position. It's not just the process stuff, stamping and doing these things. What's the major challenge of the business? What's the revenue of the business? How can we grow the business? That's your role because you're in charge of people. Lots of times, and I'm thinking it may be the same in creative, because I found this at Martha Stewart. When I talk to creative people, they didn't really understand the business side. So I can have 15 meetings of trying to arrive at a decision, but meanwhile, we need a decision on this.
Yeah.
So I think the marriage of the two, the business, the creative, or the business of whatever functional kind of role you're in, you need to understand the business.
Right. That my entire career, I think because my original major was architecture, so I was always very technical and wanting to know the structure of something. But my work always has been around understanding machinery and manufacturing, right? And understanding cost, and doing that while in parallel path while doing design. So I was always kind of managing the business as a designer, like doing two things at once in parallel. But it allowed me to work faster. It allowed me to build in a business practice where I had creatives that were thinking like they were thinking about the business. And so creatives we get the bad rap for spending big budgets, right? Because we do,
Yeah.
right? But I was able to always build a team that knew how much something cost. So as they were building it, they knew what the budget was, they knew how much they had to spend. And so we were always able to move fast because someone didn't have to talk us down from a big budget. So that's been helpful to me.
Yeah, even the concept of the budgeting, because that's the business side. You can do what you're doing on that side, but those two have to manage each other in some way. So as we begin to close out, there's two questions I always like to ask our guests at the end. Tell us about important influences that have shaped you into who you become a leader today. I mean, when you look at your career, it is just amazing that you could accomplish what you've accomplished over that period of time. But sometimes there's something that was there. I have a business partner here, and we had a meeting yesterday, and he was talking about how important his grandmother was. And his grandmother told him certain things. He didn't mention his parent. He didn't mention his first job as manager, whatever it is. But he talked about his grandmother, who's probably 100 years old now.
Yeah. Well,
important influences.
I have to say my grandmother from a perspective of just, my grandmother was a pillar in her community, the coastal South Carolina. But really, she taught me respect for older people, and listening to older people grew me up really fast. I was always at her foot and listening to these wise conversation from these elders in the community. And I've always learned that taught me to listen, right? But listen to wise people, right? And so I think that's a major foundation for me in growing and being humble, right? So humble is not a bad thing, but when you're humble and you do the work, you can then talk about your accomplishments with confidence because you've achieved it the right way, right? Other influence is my mom. She's a creative person. I remember her making and sewing and creating her own brand. And she had labels. And that was always mysterious to me. Like, what do you mean you've got labels? Okay, this is the moment. This is the brand moment. She had labels made for the things that she was making. That was it. That's why I do what I do, because I just like, what is this? What's happening? That was just so curious to me. But always, my parents always exposing me to creativity, right? And I think that made the world a difference as to where I am today and what I'm doing today.
Okay. Shout out to Jackie B. To give you some background, her mother and father and we were all in college at the same time. So that was all cool. Yeah. So what was the most important leadership lesson you've learned throughout your career?
Most important leadership lesson.
And that could be more on the corporate side or whatever it was. Could it be
Goodness. There's a lot, but I guess learning to manage expectations of everybody. Because if you don't, you're not going to be successful. If you can't manage expectations that sometimes can be unrealistic, you are kind of marching in the dark. But you also have to have the insight and confidence to be able to do it, right? So before I say yes to anything, I always ask a lot of clarifying questions. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but you have to do it. Because if you don't have clarity as to what the end goal is, how can you deliver? So being able to do that with, maybe the person at the top of the food chain in the room was a game changer for me.
Mm, mm, mm.
How can I help you achieve this goal? Speaking in that kind of language,
Yeah.
really, really made things a lot easier for me
Mm.
in doing my work.
Okay. That's really a marriage between the creative side and the business side. The business side said, I want to go over here. And the creative side said, okay, I can put something together, enable you to make that transition. And this is what business is looking for. I was telling a group yesterday that I worked with, I think I gave you background on a group. We did a webinar last night. I said, you're the solution provider for companies want to get from here to here. If you're the people experts, you got to design the people strategy, enable them to get there. So I always kind of preach that. So as we begin to close out, give us some insights as to what's next for you. I mean, you've got so many things on your plate. Is there a bigger vision as to how you're going to tie it into one thing? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, whatever you could say, because you could have something that you're working on. But I'm saying, what does the big picture look like for Del over the next few years?
Well, I definitely have some really amazing for-profit projects in development. So please, I've been working on these strategies for longer than 10 years. So please be ready for them. But I also have some amazing, philanthropy and giving back is a huge part of what I believe in. But I have some also amazing projects happening on that front. Once I get the second set of papers, I'll have a whole lot of more time, and I can really spend 100% of time developing those for-profit and nonprofit ideas. So please stay tuned. There's a lot in the hopper.
Okay, so how can we follow you? Give us your website so that Dave will pick it up and put it on the scrolling screen.
You can always follow the hashtag #BeSuperCreative. #BeSuperCreative. You can follow me at Delanie West on most socials, or #BeSuperCreative. So in all socials, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, you can find me at those three handles.
Okay, cool. Del, thank you so much for being a guest, on the show. I know you're busy, but I wanted to have you here because I've always been a big fan of yours, from here to where you are now. So it was an honor for me to have you here. So you take care. I need you to kind of hang back and stay online, and so we can talk a little more as we begin to close out. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, cool.